What is up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Backup Fantasy Sports. It is Wednesday, January 24th. My name is Ewan, and on today's episode, we're going to get into some F1 fantasy as I continue my preseason coverage of the game with some driver price predictions. Game hasn't launched yet, but thought it would be fun to kind of take a guess at where the driver is going to come out in the 2024 game. Before we get into that, though, just take a second to like and subscribe to the podcast. That way you can keep up with all of my preseason content for the 2024 F1 fantasy season, along with all of my Fantasy Premier League game week previews that I'll be doing for the remainder of the season. But we are going to get right into it here with some price prediction processes. So, right off the bat here, I wanted to kind of base my 2024 prices off of the 2023 start. So kind of like have the same budget because I don't really know how they're going to calculate it this year. So I thought that was a good starting point. So then I broke down the top 7 drivers, their percentage of the budget that they had, top 9 drivers, then the bottom 8, kind of gave myself a little bit of a jumping off point there. So for the top 7 drivers for this exercise, it was Max, Sergio, Lewis, George, Carlos, Charles, and Lando. Those were the top 7. And then it was Alonso was also included in the top 9. And the bottom 8 was who you think it would be the bottom 4 teams, in my opinion. It's Williams, AlphaTauri, Alfa Romeo or Sauber, and Haas for the 2024 season. By the end of the year here, you can see we jumped up almost like 80 million in budget. The top 7, their percentage of the budget had gone down. The top 9 had gone down as well. Bottom 8 had risen up a little bit. It was just kind of that middle class there, like the Oscar Piastris, the Lance Strolls, Esteban Ocons, Pierre Gasly's. They had kind of gone up. So for my prediction for 2024 here, I did the same budget. I tried to stick to these percentages kind of. I had to raise the floor of the middle class a tiny bit here and lower the bottom 8 for their percentage of the points. But this is where we were at for the starting prices in 2023. Max led the way. Then it was Lewis, Charles, George, Sergio, Carlos, and Lando. The bottom feeders were Zhou Guanyu, Yuki Tsunoda. Daniel Ricciardo came in halfway through the season, but I did include his starting price here because this was the 20 drivers that ended on the grid that will be on the grid this next season. Logan Sargent started the year with 4 million, and that is where he's going to start this season. Ended up with the driver standings here: Max, Sergio, Lewis, Lando, Fernando, Carlos. We all know what this was, but this is kind of where I kind of want to go with what order I was going to price these drivers in. And this is not actually the order that they will be priced in coming up here, but yeah, just kind of a basis. The 2023 driver standings, Max was overwhelmingly dominant, and he is going to get priced accordingly in my little price predictions here. So we're going to do this in 4s. I'm going to do the first 16 in kind of groups, and then I'll go 4, 3, 2, 1 to kind of reveal. So just jump around in the time codes below and you will figure it out there. As you can see in this sidebar right below my face here, just kind of the dates for some important times coming up in F1 testing is going to be February 21st through 23rd, and the Bahrain Grand Prix, February 29th through March 2nd. That is a Saturday. So just get that in your brain. The first race of the season is going to be on a Saturday this year, and the second race of the season in Saudi Arabia as well. Game launch, my best guess would be it will be about the February 24th or 25th, like right after preseason testing. I hope I discussed this with Adam over at F1 Fantasy HQ on my kind of preview palooza to kick off the preseason content, that hoping that they do take testing into their calculations this year. Last year, they did not really believe in Aston Martin's performance in testing, and it really bit them as the meta kind of put us out of our way for the first 8 races. We all were just kind of running triple Red Bull, triple Aston Martin. So hopefully that does not happen to begin the 2024 season. And I've kind of put that into my prices here as well. So let me know what you think about these prices in the comments below. What I got right, what I got wrong. Let's get into it. So starting off here, Logan Sargent, 4 million. He was the worst driver on the grid. I don't think he's in the worst car anymore. I think people would have said that before the 2023 season, but I think Williams gave us enough signs of progress that I do think they have the third or possibly fourth worst car on the grid. So that's kind of where I was at. But Logan Sargent still not consistent enough. He has the least experience of all the drivers on the grid right now as well. Well, tied with Oscar Piastri, but Piastri is in a far better car with McLaren. So he's going to start things off at 4 million. Next, I've got the Haas duo here, Nico Hulkenberg at 4.3 million and Kevin Magnussen at 4.6. I think Haas is going to have the worst car on the 2024 grid. Just lost Gunther Steiner a couple of weeks ago, which is never good in the preseason. You don't really want to be losing your team principal right before the season kicks off. So that's going to be something to watch in testing as well. But we'll see if they have fixed their issues of being a okay qualifying car on Saturday and then sinking like a rock on Sundays. If that is the case, they could be some good budget options throughout the season, but I don't think it's going to come true for Haas this season. I would expect them to be bottom of the constructor standings once again. Zhou Guanyu here. I did want to put him ahead of Valtteri Bottas, but I still think Kick Sauber or Alfa Romeo, whatever we're calling it. As you can see here, like Zhou Guanyu and Valtteri Bottas, they don't even have a racing suit on because we have no idea what their sponsorships looks like. So they have just kind of this blank, generic headshot cut out right now. So Kick Sauber or F1 Stake, whatever we're going to be calling them, we'll get some clarification on that as the season kind of comes closer to us. Zhou Guanyu here, 4.9 million. He was a phenomenal budget asset last season, but I do think he's still viewed as the number 2 driver for that team. So I didn't want to price him above Valtteri Bottas, despite him having better results in F1 Fantasy last season. Next 4 here, Valtteri Bottas, Daniel Ricciardo, Yuki Tsunoda, and Alexander Albon. Bottas just barely above Zhou Guanyu. I still think there's a little bit of talent left in the Finnish driver here, but not a lot. I think the gap between him and his teammate has closed considerably over the last 18 months. Daniel Ricciardo, Yuki Tsunoda, very close to each other. Adam made a great point on the Preview Palooza that came out last week that he thinks AlphaTauri or Visa, Cash App, Racing Bulls will get there eventually with the team names. They could be this year's Aston Martin. There's a lot of talk that they are just kind of taking parts off the RB19, the Constructors' Championship winning car last year, and kind of just slapping it right on their car. So this could be a huge boost for that team moving forward. Daniel Ricciardo, Yuki Tsunoda, also one of the more experienced lineups that they've put together in recent seasons. They've had Tsunoda and De Vries last year to kick things off, Tsunoda and Gasly when Tsunoda was in his first couple of seasons. But now Tsunoda, I would say he is well established on the grid, and Ricciardo is obviously quite a legend on the track. So put them right next to each other. I do think Yuki has better results. I do think he is the lead driver in that team. Daniel would probably disagree there, but that's what F1 drivers do. So I had them kind of as second and third in the bottom 8 rankings here. Alexander Albon, he's the most talented of these bottom 4 teams, the most talented driver, in my opinion. 6.8 million is where I'm predicting he's going to start the 2024 season. Last year, it was 5.5. He showed us that he kind of made a mockery of that price tag as the season went on. Some phenomenal driving in a not so phenomenal car. So I hope Williams have made some upgrades. They've kind of gotten over some of their shortcomings in the factory, and hopefully the progression is still on its way. So I think I have Albon here at 6.8 because I kind of wanted to price him out of the generic build of like what we did last year with triple Red Bull, triple Aston Martin, and just kind of a bottom feeder. So Albon needs to be kind of in a price class of his own. He's not that far off of these next 4, however, especially the Alpine guys. Esteban Ocon, 7.1 million. Alpine had some sporadically okay-ish results. Ocon had a podium in Monaco. Gasly had a couple of good races at the end of the year here, some sprint finishes as well. But Alpine just kind of still trending in the wrong direction. They're a nobody in our fantasy lineups last year. I don't think a lot of people that were high up in the world rankings really had them all that much. So I've kind of really penalized them for the 2024 season in my price predictions here. Esteban Ocon 7.1 million, Pierre Gasly 7.7 million. Lance Stroll is one of the few drivers. I think him, Joe Guan Yu, and Logan Sargent are the only drivers who I kept exactly as the same price for 2024 as they had for 2023, because Lance Stroll didn't really exceed expectations. Like, he was in a brilliant car and he had a couple of good results here and there, but I mean, we saw what Fernando Alonso could do at the start of the season, and Stroll was really struggling. Once the car kind of fell back through the field, people were like, "Oh, Stroll's doing an okay job," but I mean, considering what a good car Aston Martin put out at the beginning of the year, Stroll really was not bringing those results in. So I kind of just plopped him right in the middle of this glob here between Albon, Ocon, Lance Stroll himself, and Pierre Gasly, all in like within a million of each other. Then we take a pretty significant price jump up here to Oscar Piastri, 8.9 million. The kind of mechanics of the game, just with how I was working with the starting budget that we had for 2023, kind of forced me to put him down here as a upper middle tier option, but I didn't want to get him into the kind of double digits 10 million price point, because then he might just be a kind of dead asset in the fantasy game. The problem with this whole thing is Max was so dominant. I had to price him up quite a lot. And it was took a little bit of a flattening for the middle part of like the upper class, like the top 4 or 5 teams here. So Oscar Piastri, I do value him below Fernando Alonso. I think Alonso still got it. He can still kind of put a car up there in the starting grid and kind of drive it home. Whereas Piastri did show signs of kind of still learning on the job. So he kind of gets priced below at 8.9 million here. Next 4, these are the final 4 that I'll do in a bunch. The 4, 3, 2, 1 will be coming up next, which you can obviously guess who those will be from these next 4 guys. So Fernando Alonso, Lando Norris, George Russell, and Carlos Sainz here. Alonso comes in 10.5 million. Aston Martin could put out a strong car at the beginning of the year once again, and I would expect Fernando to do quite well. But I didn't want to price him so low like last year when we had the meta problem. So that's kind of what I'm doing here. Lando, George, and Carlos. Now, I understand that Lando had a phenomenal second half of the season. That some would say he was probably the second best driver on the grid in possibly the second best car. But I didn't want to take that chance. There's been a whole offseason of Mercedes and Ferrari being able to kind of catch up. Uh, McLaren was slapping upgrades on that car a whole lot in the second half, while Mercedes and Ferrari were kind of taking it slow. They weren't developing all that much, just kind of testing stuff out for this season. So I think in terms of like game strategy, you do still want to have the top 3 teams, Mercedes, Ferrari, and Red Bull, as the top 6 drivers as well, because you really don't want to cause something where like Lando Norris is no longer an option in F1 fantasy because he's priced up too high, but he's in the 4th worst car. So this is where I put Lando for that reason. But I did price him up quite a bit, 14.6 million. That McLaren car is very impressive. It will be curious to see. They seem to have been saying all the right things in the offseason, that they like the car, they like where it's going. They're expecting to kind of challenge the top of the grid and like really make a statement for 2024. Russell had kind of a sophomore slump with Mercedes, so I priced him down here a bit as well. And Carlos Sainz, still the number 2 driver in Ferrari, in my opinion, and he probably will be in the game. So this is the part that I was just talking about with flattening the curve here. Lando Norris, George Russell, Carlos Sainz, all kind of in a similar range, but with the game mechanics, I think that they will not want to kind of put them all so close together that you're kind of just picking one each week, which would make it a little bit more interesting. But they don't want to also be like where Mercedes, who suddenly have a car matching Red Bull, is way cheaper than the McLaren, who's 4th or Ferrari, who's third. So that's kind of my thinking there. So fourth in the price predictions here, Charles Leclerc, 19.3 million, quite a drop from last year. His 2022 performance had him all the way up next to Lewis in the price point to begin last year, but not anymore. 19.3 million. This is kind of a Ferrari tax, I would say. Just don't really trust them all that much to develop the car. Charles Leclerc was really not in our thoughts for F1 Fantasy until the end of the season all that much. He was there at Monza. He had a good race at Coda, but got DQ'd. So hopefully this price gets him back into our F1 fantasy thoughts quite a bit. 19.3 million for Ferrari's lead driver. Hopefully they can improve their car over the offseason. The reveals are coming up here in the next 2 or 3 weeks. So definitely getting some coverage on that whenever that pops up. But yeah, Charles Leclerc, 19.3 million, the fourth most expensive driver for F1 Fantasy in 2024. Next up, Sergio Perez, huge leap for the Mexican driver here. He was 18 million last year, and that was he kind of made a mockery of that price as well, kind of like Alexander Albon made of his too. He was in the meta immediately, even though he was qualifying poorly. With the way the game was set up, it was actually beneficial because then he would have phenomenal Sundays with overtakes. Was quite a discussed driver in the second half of the season when his performances were all over the place, very roller coaster like DNFs, crashes, second places. I could not get a handle on him in the second half of the season. He was kind of my thorn in my side as I looked for a good overall ranking, which did not happen thanks to this guy right here. But 21.3 million, third most expensive driver. I do think they will still want Lewis as the second most expensive driver. It's going to be second most popular driver on the grid behind Max Verstappen. So especially if Mercedes take a huge leap, they're not going to want a Mercedes car to be less than both Red Bulls, despite how dominant Red Bull have been. Lewis coming in 22.5 million. So not that much more expensive than Checo, but I do think they are going to want to hedge their bets here. Still make Lewis the second most expensive driver. Mercedes still believing that they could take a big leap. I do hope we see a lot in testing from both these teams. If Mercedes do look alive, this is where I think it will be, but hopefully the game does not shy away from making Red Bull the most expensive assets, like the 1-2 drivers and the most expensive constructor, because the aim of the game should be to encourage strategy, get different here. And that's what I've tried to do with my price predictions here. Like these kind of have made it a little bit more difficult to build that classic meta team that we had last year. So it's going to be making you think quite a bit about, are you going to go stars and scrubs with like a max heavy lineup and then kind of a couple of the middle guys and a couple of bottom feeders, or you're going to go all the way up with Max and Checo, and then you're really struggling for price. Like I've done the constructor price predictions already. That's going to be in another video later in the preseason here, but yeah, it's definitely going to be difficult to build that kind of meta lineup. And the big reveal here, Max Verstappen, 27.5 million, not messing around this year. He was 26.9 to begin the year last year. The kind of calculations that I ran this through had him at like 28.9, but that was way too expensive to start the season. I hope that they want to make it more difficult to just rely on Max as the kind of, why would you ever take him out of your lineup kind of guy. So hopefully that happens in the 2024 game. In 2022, when Play On had it, they had it priced quite nicely where Max and Lewis, they were so expensive that you really were making sacrifices in your team to get them in. So a lot of people were going with Charles and Carlos and Sergio as different strategies. So hopefully pricing Max Verstappen up here will encourage different strategies throughout the F1 fantasy community, as it's like, okay, am I going to get Max in, get all the points, and then I'm going to have to suffer on the back end, possibly higher DNF risk, that sort of stuff. Because that did not happen last year with Aston Martin and Red Bull to kick off the season. And it was a little boring. We talked about that with Adam again on that Preview Palooza episode that was released last week. So here's the summary of all the drivers. Verstappen with a pretty big edge over the rest of the field, 5 million more than Lewis Hamilton, 27.5 to 22.5. There's the kind of flattening of the curve you can see that I was talking about. Charles Leclerc, Carlos Sainz, George Russell, Lando Norris, all within 5 million of each other, which is the gap between Lewis and Max. That's kind of hopefully that's going to make the game a little bit more strategic, get different prices in. And then I kind of took a lot away from the bottom part of the field here, the bottom eight. I do think the bottom three teams of Sauber, Williams, and Haas, I think they're going to be pretty terrible in 2024. I don't think we're going to want their assets all that much in our squads. It could be that the game changes the rules a little bit, like some point scoring stuff here, like beat the teammate points come back. Hopefully, that's what I was saying in my predictions on that episode with Adam last week. That would encourage us to kind of go back to the bottom feeders. But with Max being so expensive in my driver price predictions, and then these bottom feeders kind of not being worth all that much, I hope that's going to kind of shake things up. And this is what I was hoping for. This hopefully illustrates the price predictions here. So I just kind of put together the same meta team for the 2024 price predictions that I have compared to the 2023. So if you added all those up in 2023, it came to 65.5 million, left you with plenty of space for Red Bull and Aston Martin. Whereas if you try to do that this year, it's going to cost you almost 7 million more, 72.3 million. And you're not going to be able to get in Red Bull with the constructor price predictions that I have there. I think Red Bull is going to be touching 29, 30 million. So hopefully that will lead to a lot of different strategies. But let me know what you think about these price predictions. I mean, just kind of taking a swing, just kind of feeling out my thoughts. I think they will still keep the top three teams and top six drivers at the top. I don't think McLaren's going to take that big of a leap. I don't think they're going to put Lando over George or Carlos. It'd be exciting if they did. I'm not sure how it would work for the game mechanics later on in the season, though, if Mercedes and Ferrari do start to catch up to McLaren or even like have made such a big development over the winter that they are already ahead of them by the time preseason testing comes around. But that is not that far away, less than a month to preseason testing when we really get to see these cars on the track, see what they're capable of, see if there's any shock results, like are the Racing Bulls, Visa Cash App, whatever we're going to call them, are they going to kind of really have a car to keep an eye on in the first part of the season? How dominant is Red Bull going to be? Yeah, so much going on. So I'm super looking forward to that. Hopefully you are too. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel or the podcast if you're listening on the audio side here. And yeah, follow me on Twitter or X at UNFPL and on TikTok as well, where I'll start doing some short form F1 fantasy content over there. But once again, thanks for listening, and I will talk to you next time.